The City of New York is committed to promoting fair housing and equitable development throughout the 5 boroughs. Part of that commitment is better equipping New Yorkers with information to facilitate challenging conversations about housing affordability, racial equity, displacement, and other issues related to the fairness of our city and neighborhoods. The city is creating an equitable development data tool to inform those conversations and help us plan for a fairer city. This data tool will be an online, interactive resource for New Yorkers who are interested in exploring the city's housing conditions, demographic patterns, public health, and more. The city will formally launch the tool in April 2022, and your feedback in the upcoming weeks can help us shape it. Mockups that allow you to simulate navigating the upcoming tool are available for you to explore. Let's take a look. You'll first see a map of New York City. You can select the area you'd like to explore data for, a neighborhood, a borough, or the whole city. For example, let's select the Sunnyside and Woodside area in Queens, then view data. You'll see key data categories on the left and tables on the right, giving you easy access to information that can facilitate conversations about equity in the city. We can use this data to better understand factors that may contribute to displacement or the involuntary movement of a person or family from their home, and support strategies to help New Yorkers stay in their homes and neighborhoods. One component of the data tool will be a displacement risk index map. This map will illustrate the level of risk that residents of a neighborhood for example, poverty levels, housing conditions, and rent change. The Displacement Risk Index will be a snapshot of current conditions. It isn't a tool for predicting changes in a neighborhood or outcomes of any given proposal. We expect a wide variety of New Yorkers will use the data tool, such as advocacy groups, community boards, elected officials, and policymakers. Share your ideas about how this in-development resource can be shaped and improved to help advance collective discussions around racial equity and access to affordable and quality housing. Give your feedback online, by email, or at upcoming public information sessions and hearings. Get all the details and learn more about the data tool at bit.ly/equitable data tool. The City of New York is committed to promoting fair housing and equitable development throughout the 5 boroughs. Part of that commitment is better equipping New Yorkers with information to facilitate challenging conversations about housing affordability, racial equity, displacement, and other issues related to the fairness of our city and neighborhoods. The city is creating an equitable development data tool to inform those conversations and help us plan for a fairer city. This data tool will be an online, interactive resource for New Yorkers who are interested in exploring the city's housing conditions, demographic patterns, public health, and more. The city will formally launch the tool in April 2022, and your feedback in the upcoming weeks can help us shape it. Mockups that allow you to simulate navigating the upcoming tool are available for you to explore. Let's take a look. You'll first see a map of New York City. You can select the area you'd like to explore data for, a neighborhood, a borough, or the whole city. For example, let's select the Sunnyside and Woodside area in Queens, Then view data. You'll see key data categories on the left and tables on the right, giving you easy access to information that can facilitate conversations about equity in the city. We can use this data to better understand factors that may contribute to displacement or the involuntary movement of a person or family from their home, and support strategies to help New Yorkers stay in their homes and neighborhoods. One component of the data tool will be a displacement risk index map. This map will illustrate the level of risk that residents of a neighborhood may face of being displaced as compared to other neighborhoods. Select a neighborhood to see a summary of data that is relevant to displacement risk. For example, poverty levels, housing conditions, and rent change. The Displacement Risk Index will be a snapshot of current conditions. It isn't a tool for proposal. We expect a wide variety of New Yorkers will use the data tool, such as advocacy groups, community boards, elected officials, and policymakers. Share your ideas about how this in-development resource can be shaped and improved to help advance collective discussions around racial equity and access to affordable and quality housing. Give your feedback online, by email, or at upcoming public information sessions and hearings. Get all the details and learn more about the data tool at bit.ly/equitable data tool.
Hello, good evening and welcome. I am Justin Lamorella from the Department of City Planning, and I'm joined today by several colleagues from the New York City Department of City Planning and Department of Housing Preservation and Development. From City Planning, I'm joined by Lara Morita, the Director of Neighborhood Studies, Sri Plakin from the Queen's Office, and Erica Marr from the Population Division. From the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, we are joined by Renee Widdison and Chris Servideo from the Office of Neighborhood Strategies. Before we start, a few housekeeping notes. We will start with a presentation and then dedicate the rest of the meeting to answer as many questions as possible. During the presentation, if a question comes to mind, you can submit it by using the Q&A feature. Staff will collect the questions and queue them up for the live Q&A session. When we start the live Q&A portion of the event, you will then have two options to ask a question. You can either continue to submit written questions through the Q&A feature, or you can raise your hand. And if you are phoning in, press *9 to raise your hand. When your name is called, you'll be able to use the buttons at the bottom left corner of your Zoom screen to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you'd like. And we will alternate between written questions and those who want to ask a question verbally. And don't worry, I'm going to go over all of this information again after the presentation. Next slide, please. After the presentation, the chat feature will also be enabled so that you can interact with one another. And again, if you want to ask us a question, please put it in the Q&A box instead of the chat. In addition, if you're having any technical issues at any point, call the hotline number on the screen. The number is 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 618-237-7396, and the password is £1. And someone will be there to assist you. This technical hotline info can be found at the bottom of every slide in case you're in need of assistance. Also, in addition to American Sign Language interpretation on your screen, we are also offering simultaneous interpretation today in Spanish, Mandarin, and Cantonese. To access these services, click the interpretation button on the bottom of the screen and select Spanish, the Spanish channel for Spanish, the Chinese channel for Mandarin, and the Portuguese channel for Cantonese. And I'll pause here so that the interpreters can translate.
Sí, muy buenos días, muy buenas tardes. Favor, si necesitan interpretación en español, aprieten el botón donde dice lenguaje español. Ahí van a encontrar intérpretes de habla hispana que van a interpretar de manera continua toda la presentación.
我们现在呢，提供不同语言的翻译。如果你是需要中文翻译，请你点选下面翻译选项那边有一个中文的。那如果你是需要广东话的，麻烦你点选葡萄牙语的。如果你是需要西班牙文翻译的话，请点选西班牙文。我们上面也有这个专线，如果你有任何的建议想要提供的话，你可以打上面的电话，那会有专人来提供语言的服務。
我係呢個係廣東話嘅翻譯。如果你需要廣東話嘅翻譯咧，你請你撳嗰個葡萄牙式嗰個button 嗰個號，然後就有廣東話嘅翻譯。如果你仲有咩需要，有咩問題咧，你可以打電話去877-853-5247，同埋咧有 enter 呢個有 ID number 618-237-7396。
Thank you. So I'll now turn it over to Sarit Plakin to start the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. I am Sarit Platkin from the Department of City Planning, and on behalf of the interagency team, I'm excited for you all to join us today for the second Equitable Development Data Tool info session. Today, we are going to provide background on this new resource and the initiative that it stems from, as well as do a demonstration of the draft tool and provide information about next steps and how to provide input during the draft phase that we're in right now. And then we'll answer any questions. So we are at a critical stage in the process right now, having released a draft version of the website on January 25th and moving towards an April 1st launch of the fully functional new data tool. In this draft phase, we want to make sure that we're hearing from a broad range of New Yorkers about how you would want to use the tool, how it relates to conversations you're having in your communities, and whether the tool, as it's currently designed, would meet your needs. The public hearing for this initiative will be on March 10th, and we're holding these info sessions in advance to ensure that New Yorkers are fully equipped to participate in the hearing. I also want to highlight that this is just the beginning of opportunities to learn about and weigh in on the tool. In addition to the upcoming public hearing, we'll be providing trainings for community boards and the public once the website is launched in April. And we also want to look forward to ongoing discussions about and feedback about the tool after it's launched in April. The tool is going to continue to evolve after the launch, and we see after it's launched and we see how it's being used in practice and how it can be improved. So with that, we look forward to sharing the draft of this resource with you today, and we'll be happy to answer any questions and hear your initial thoughts and feedback afterwards. So the Equitable Development Data Tool is going to be an interactive online public data tool that will allow New Yorkers to explore data about housing conditions, demographics, quality of life, and more at the neighborhood up through the citywide levels. This new resource will provide New Yorkers with easy access to a wide range of data about their neighborhoods and city to help facilitate challenging conversations about housing affordability, equity, displacement, and other key planning issues. Whenever possible, these data will be broken down by neighborhood and race and ethnicity so that New Yorkers can learn about disparities across neighborhoods and demographic groups. The data will also show change over time over the last 20 years, so New Yorkers can understand the shifting demographics and housing patterns in New York City. So how did this tool originate? The creation of the Equitable Development Data Tool is the creation of the Equitable Development Data Tool is a requirement of Local Law 78, passed in June of 2021. This legislation developed out of ongoing advocacy by the Racial Impact Study Coalition and public advocate Jumani Williams to ensure that racial equity is centered in major decisions affecting New York City neighborhoods, such as land use. Local Law 78 of 2021 includes two major components: the Equitable Development Data Tool and racial equity reports. The Equitable Development Data Tool, as mentioned up front, will be an interactive web tool that will have a wide variety of data broken down by race and ethnicity available at the neighborhood, borough, and citywide levels. A key piece of this tool, as required by the legislation, is the Displacement Risk Index. The Displacement Risk Index is going to be a map of the city that illustrates the level of risk in different neighborhoods that residents face of being displaced or unable to remain in their homes or neighborhoods. The Equitable Development Data Tool is required to be complete by April 1st, and we are currently in the draft phase of the tool with the opportunity to provide input on it through March 20th. The second major component of the legislation, the Racial Equity Reports on Housing and Opportunity, will be disclosure reports required for certain land use applications beginning in June of 2022. These reports will inform the land use process by providing context to support discussions of race and equity in planning. We'll be providing more details on all of these components throughout the presentation. So now that we've talked about what is required by the legislation, we want to talk about the benefits that we see this tool providing in practice. Having a tool that provides easily accessible neighborhood demographic and housing data broken down by race will bring racial equity considerations into the forefront of planning conversations in New York City. Given the potential for this new resource to inform everything from site-specific to neighborhood-wide to citywide planning efforts, we anticipate that this tool could be used by a wide variety of stakeholders. Community boards may use it in reviewing land use proposals and preparing community district need statements. Advocacy and nonprofit organizations may use it to do research about citywide housing and demographic trends. And community members leading conversations about neighborhood planning and change may find it helpful to advocate for their planning priorities. Above all, as an interagency team, we see this new tool as becoming a shared resource between planners and community members that can provide a new way of talking and engaging about displacement pressures and neighborhood change that will hopefully allow for more common ground and facilitate planning policies that more explicitly consider race. So taken together, these objectives aim to support more equitable development long-term. So now that we've covered the background, we're actually going to shift to do a demonstration of the website and the draft materials that are available for review right now. So 1 second. Great. So here we are. This is the website. You can navigate it either by scrolling down or using the top navigation bar to see the different sections up here. The first thing that you'll see when you get to the site is a short video that breaks down the primary components of the tool. The website starts with a welcome section that provides background on what we're building, the legislation, who's involved, and what is up for review right now, which is actually the first thing that I want to highlight. So right now, there are 4 major pieces that are available to review by the public. There are interactive mock-ups of what the data tool is going to look like, which I'll show you in just a second. There is a displacement risk index or map of the city illustrating the level of displacement risk in different neighborhoods as compared to each other. And then there's also a data dictionary describing the data points and methodologies included in the data tool and a bibliography of the literature that informed the selected data points and methodologies. From there, we move into a timeline showing all of the major milestones of when materials were released in January and February, the different engagement opportunities currently in March with the remote info sessions such as the one that you're attending right now, the public hearing coming up next week on March 10th, and then upcoming milestones beyond that going forward, such as the full launch of the data tool on April 1st and the date that the racial equity reports go into effect, which is June 1st. And then from there, there's a section detailing the different engagement opportunities and ways to provide input. So we just talked about the info sessions. There's another one coming up on Saturday. We're also going to have office hours next week on Monday. If you want to,
I'm sorry, could you please pause for a moment? We're having a technical difficulty. Could our ASL interpreter please turn back on her camera?
My camera is on. My name is Yasmin. I'm on right now.
Thank you so much. Hold on one second. Could everyone unpin or not stop pinning? It's interfering with the spotlight on YouTube for our ASL translation. Yasmin, I'm sorry, could you turn off your camera briefly just so we can reset the system?
Got it.
And could we stop sharing the presentation for a moment? Or actually, leave it as is. Whoever's sharing, or Yasmin, try turning your camera back on. Perfect, I think. Thank you very much. I think we're good to go. Please proceed with the presentation. Sorry for the inconvenience.
great. So getting back to it, we were just covering the ways to provide input, which is, attending info sessions, attending office hours for a one-on-one conversation with the project team next week, providing testimony at the public hearing later next week. And then, of course, you can also email us feedback at this email. We'll have all this info at the end, and also share your feedback directly in the website as well. From there, the website moves on to give some background on what the data tool is going to include in terms of the different categories of data that include things like demographics, housing security and quality, and neighborhood quality of life. And then from there, the website actually has some very exciting interactive mockups of what the future data tool is going to look like, which you can look at either as standalone images here on the site, or you can click above, which we're going to do together right now, and shift over to see interactive versions of these mockups. Okay, so we're now in a mock-up of what the future data tool is going to look like. And I'm going to do a quick demonstration of how you navigate through the future data tool. It is going to be a lot of information, so you can definitely dive into it more on your own. We're also going to put links into the chat so that you can follow along. And we're, of course, happy to answer any questions about this during the Q&A. All right, so let's get started. So what you see here is the landing page for the future data tool, where you'll have the option of selecting between 3 levels of geography: community district, borough, and city. And From there, you can actually select on a specific neighborhood. Right now, the Sunnyside and Woodside neighborhood is available to click on in this draft version of the tool. And when you click on the Sunnyside and Woodside neighborhood, you can click the View Data button, which will bring you to a new screen that shows you the data tables. So before diving into the data tables, I do just want to note that these are just mockups, which is why the data tables aren't populated with actual data yet. But of course, once the data tool is fully launched in April, these will be populated, fully populated with data. So right now, this is for demonstration purposes to just give you a sense of what the tables are going to look and feel like. But if you do want to really kind of dive into the data, we have all of the data sources listed in the data dictionary. So that would be the place to follow up on that right now. Okay. So once you get into the data tables, you can toggle between the different data categories on the left. So you can move between demographic conditions, household economic security, and housing production. But let's actually start with demographics, where the first indicator at the top is mutually exclusive race and Hispanic origin. And you can scroll down from there to see the different data points in this category, like age, foreign-born population, and limited English-speaking population. And then you can scroll to the right to see the different time points and how these categories or these data points change over time between 2000 and 2020. I'll also note that the data source is listed at the top of each table, and that at the very top of the overall data tables, you can toggle back and forth between the racial breakdown and see different racial and ethnic groups. So I'm gonna just walk you through the steps of how to do that in these mockups. So if you click that arrow down below, it minimizes the categories on the left and brings you to a full screen where you can move between total population, which is what we're looking at right now, and then the different racial and ethnic groups. And then you can do the same thing for the different categories. So if we go back and unminimize that, which we can do here. So if you go back and unminimize, you can then get to the different categories and do the same thing for household economic security, which has indicators like educational attainment, median household income, and area median income, and housing production, which shows change over time of housing units and affordable housing construction and preservation. So we're kind of getting close to the end of our demonstration of the data tool, but I do want to point out a couple other things before we move on. And so one of the things that I do want to point out are a couple of features. There is the download button on the top right, which will allow anyone interested in the tables to download this information. And then there is another feature right here, which is the Show Reliability Data button. And this tool, the data tool has implemented a data reliability threshold that's based on the department standards. So if you'd like to see the reliability data, you can click on that button that's just under the download button. And it's going to show you the margin of error and coefficient of variation of the data if you want to get additional information. So we're wrapping up our demo here. And as we segue to the other components of the initiative, I do just want to note that an important use of the data tool is going to be to provide data for the racial equity reports that are going to be required for certain land use applications. And I'm actually going to step into giving you a little more information about that right now. Next slide, please. Okay, so Local Law 78 requires certain applicants participating in the city's land use review process, known as ULURP, to submit racial equity reports beginning in June of 2022. These reports will provide context for the discussion of racial equity in the review of land use applications, and the reports will generally be required for projects including residential developments that are over 50,000 square feet or 50 units, and non-residential developments that are over 200,000 square feet, as well as other more specific cases. And the racial equity reports are going to have three primary components. The first is a community profile of data pulled from the data tool. The second is project-specific data about the proposed housing units and anticipated jobs in the project. And the third is a narrative statement of how the project relates to the city's goals to further fair housing and equitable access to opportunity. And so with that, I will just note that the interagency team that is advancing this project right now is currently moving into developing guidance for the report as a next step. And we're going to be offering trainings to stakeholders about the reports, what will be included in them, how to review them later in the spring. So please do kind of keep an eye out for those trainings going forward. And so with that, I will transition and turn it over to Renee to talk more about the Displacement Risk Index.
Thank you, Sarit. My name is Renee Widdison. I'm really excited to talk to you all tonight about the Displacement Risk Index. So what is this? First, Sarit spoke about the Displacement Risk Index at the beginning of the presentation. It's a component of the larger data tool, larger equitable development data tool. So this new citywide analysis incorporates risk factors that may contribute to displacement. It's a composite indicator. Unlike the data tool that Sarit showed you, where individual data points are presented, this index combines a number of indicators. And it's important to note that it's based on the most recent conditions and trends that we have data for. So what will this Displacement Risk Index do? Sarit also alluded to this, but it will inform the ongoing development of strategies to prevent displacement. The tool can be used by members of the public. Of course, it's going to be available, but that is certainly a goal that we have here at the city. It will also provide context for the consideration of policies and projects. And the Displacement Risk Index, it's not predictive, so it's not able to tell us the future or predict outcomes from specific neighborhood or development proposals, but it can provide important common ground for conversations about housing and neighborhood stability. So I mentioned that the DRI, the Displacement Risk Index, incorporates risk factors. What are these risk factors? Well, there are three major categories of factors that we know contribute to displacement risk. So one of these is population vulnerability to displacement. These are characteristics of a household that make them more or less at risk of being forced to move, like how much of your income you're spending on rent, which we call rent burden. The second category of risk factors are housing conditions, or characteristics of the housing itself that contribute to housing stability, like whether or not your rent is stabilized. The last category is market pressure. These are neighborhood-wide forces that can make it harder for a household to stay in their home, like overall housing price changes. So I'm going to walk you through more detail about these factors, and I'll remind you that everything I'm about to show you is available on the website for you to explore. And as a reminder, if you have any questions about what I'm going through, please add them to the Q&A chat or note them down, and we'll be happy to answer questions later. So you can see I'm now back at the website that Sarit was walking us through earlier, and I'm under the category or in the top bar called Displacement Risk Index. I've scrolled down to this map called Population Vulnerability. This again is one of the terms of the three categories of risk factors that we talked about on the last slide. On the left of this website, you can see the details of the map you're looking at. So we're looking at the population vulnerability category, and it's composed, as it tells us here, of 4 data points: race, income, limited English proficiency, and rent burden. So those 4 data points are combined to come up with an overall population vulnerability for a neighborhood. So on the right is a map showing that overall population vulnerability. And on the map, a darker blue color represents more population risk factors relative to the rest of the city. And lighter places shown on the map show less intense risk factors relative to the rest of the city. Now, where did these 4 data points come from? Well, we picked these 4 indicators because both research and experience shows that these factors influence a household's stability. For example, rent burden. Rent burden is the percent of your income that you spend on rent. So this map is showing one of the indicators inside the larger population vulnerability category. And what this map is showing us is the share of households in a neighborhood that are spending 50% or more of their income on rent. We call that severe rent burden. When this is the case, it becomes very difficult for a household to afford even modest increases in rent because they're paying such a large proportion of their income towards their housing costs. So if a neighborhood has more households in this situation, the neighborhood is a more at-risk neighborhood. Now, I'm going to explain a little bit about the legend that you see here. Because of some of the realities of the data that we're dealing with, this particular map is showing rates of severe rent burden compared to the citywide average. So in other words, there is a certain percentage of all New York households that are severely rent burdened. And this map is showing which neighborhoods have about the same rate of severe rent burden as the city as a whole. Those neighborhoods are shown in gray. It's showing neighborhoods that have a lower rate of severe rent burden than the city in light blue. And you can see neighborhoods that have a higher rate of severe rent burden than the city in the darker blue. Now we're going to look at housing conditions. So this is the category of housing conditions where more unstable housing leads to a greater risk of displacement. So for housing conditions, the 4 data points that are included in this overall category are rental units rather than ownership units, housing that is not income restricted or rent stabilized, and housing that has a lot of maintenance deficiencies. We included these factors because, again, both research and experience show that these factors impact displacement risk. So rental housing is less stable because there are more ways a household can be pushed out. Housing that is poorly maintained is also less stable because it may be legally unsafe to live in, or it could be a sign of landlord harassment. So this map is showing the combined effect of these 4 data points. And you can see on the map that darker green neighborhoods have the least stable housing conditions, again, composed of these 4 data points. And the lightest green have the most stable housing conditions. So let's look at one of the indicators in this category. We'll look at rental units. So this map on the left, you can see we're looking at the percent of all the occupied housing that is rented rather than being owned. And you can see from the legend at the bottom left of the map that the darkest green are neighborhoods where 85 to 100% of the housing units are rented. In the lightest green, under about 40% of the housing units are rented. Now we'll look at the market pressure category. So this, just like population vulnerability or housing conditions, the market pressure category is composed of 4 data points. So market pressure, again, it's looking at neighborhood-wide forces that influence the housing market and increase risk of displacement. The indicators included here are change in rents, housing price appreciation, change in population with a college degree, and proximity to neighborhoods experiencing a lot of market pressure. So again, like the earlier models, the map on the right is showing you the combination of those 4 factors. So neighborhoods with the darker color have higher market pressures relative to the rest of the city, and lighter colored areas have relatively lower market pressure. So again, we'll look at an example of one of these. Housing price appreciation, it's kind of a fancy name, but essentially we're talking about how fast housing prices or how severely housing prices have gone up. This map in particular is showing how fast residential sale prices increased between 2000 and 2020. So again, why is this included in the market pressure category? Well, we know that it's harder for households to weather more extreme increases in housing prices. So faster rates of price increases are considered to be at a higher displacement risk. So to account for very different starting prices in the year 2000, this map is showing an indexed value, which is why you don't see any dollar signs. But it's to explain how it works. If you look at the legend, a neighborhood that has a score of about 3 in this index would have tripled in price since 2000, the average kind of sale price. A score of 2 would be that the average sale price doubled. So the darker color shows areas with faster price increases. The lighter color reflects slower price increases. And to note, you know, this isn't showing that prices in the darker areas are necessarily higher than in the lighter color areas. It's showing that the change since 2000 is greater. So let's go back to where we started. What is the displacement risk index? So again, it's incorporating factors that contribute to risk. It's a composite indicator, and it's based on recent trends and conditions. And hopefully all those points make a little more sense now. So I also mentioned that the DRI is a component of the overall data tool. So on the website, you can see what I mean. So we're back to that page that Sarit was walking you through earlier, but Sarit had this toggle to data tool. If you click displacement risk, you'll be able to see the map that combines those 3 categories of risk factors that we just talked about. And if you saw the video that we showed at the beginning, the map in that video was a fictitious map, but this map is a current citywide draft of combining those risk factors and sort of scoring neighborhoods on a scale of lowest to highest displacement risk. So the darker colored neighborhoods represent the greatest displacement risk. The lightest color represents lower risk. So we've talked about this timeline a few times, but I just want to remind you that these draft materials have been online for about a month. You're welcome to continue to review them. We would love your feedback and comments. And on March 10th next week, there will be a public hearing. And on April 1st, the website officially will launch. And don't worry if all of this was very confusing. We'll be back to do more trainings with community boards and with the public in April and the spring on how to use this tool. So at this point, I imagine there are a few questions rolling around in your head or some comments. We're going to get to the Q&A in just a second, but I want to remind you again of all the ways you can share your input. So if you have specific comments on what's in the tool, how the displacement risk index works, on what the website looks like, we'd love to hear them at the public hearing on March 10th. You can email us directly or leave questions on the website. We ask you do that by March 20th, just so we can get that feedback in before the website launches. And if you want to get into the weeds on all of this, we're putting up some office hours, so you can sign up for a one-on-one chat with the project team next Monday evening. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Justin.
Great, thank you. So we're now going to kick off the live Q&A. And just as a reminder, there are 2 ways to ask questions. You can continue to submit written questions via the Q&A feature, which I see some of you already have, and that's great. And you can also raise your hand to ask a question verbally. If you are phoning in, you can press *9 to raise your hand. If you do choose to raise your hand and your name is called, you will be promoted to panelist, and your Zoom window will close and reopen so that you're promoted. But don't worry, this will only take a second. Once you are a panelist, you will be able to use the buttons at the bottom left corner of your Zoom screen to unmute yourself, and you can turn on your camera if you'd like. I'll be alternating between written questions and those who want to ask a question verbally. So let's get started. I'm going to start with some of the written questions that have already been submitted. And the first question is, where are you getting the data?
Sure. So we're getting the data mostly from the US Census Bureau's American Community Survey and the decennial census, also from the Housing Vacancy Survey, and then a number of sources that are coming from the Department of Health and the Department of Education and like sources from that. A full list of our sources for each of the variables can be found in the data dictionary. So you can look at each one individually.
Great, thank you, Erica. Next question. How did you choose the threshold of 50,000 square feet or 50 units? In many areas, thousands of units of housing and significant displacement risk may be created through many small developments. Will you be looking at the cumulative effect of all potential development below 50 units?
Okay, I'll answer that one. Hi, everyone. Sarit Platkin from the Department of City Planning. So thank you so much for that question. I think I do want to clarify just a couple of things before kind of launching into it. So, one clarification I want to make is that the 50,000 square foot threshold is actually for what triggers the racial equity reports. It's not a threshold that relates to the displacement risk index. And then, another component that I do also want to highlight is that when it comes to, thinking about neighborhoods where we're seeing kind of many smaller developments, that often happens through as of right rezoning, which is rezoning that is permitted with kind of current regulations today and is not usually associated with changes to the zoning. And changes to the zoning are what trigger these racial equity reports or these deeper dives into racial equity data in a neighborhood. So that's at a high level. And then, of course, with the displacement risk index, which you referenced, that is very much designed to look at neighborhood characteristics. It is at the neighborhood level, looking at neighborhood characteristics and market data there. So feel free to ask any follow-up questions if you're out there and want any clarity on what I just shared.
I think that's all the questions we've been asked so far, and I don't see anyone with their hand raised. You can pause there and see if anyone wants to submit a question or raise their hand.
For our dial-in attendees, if you want to press *6, that will raise your hand. Oh, my apologies, *9.
So, since we don't have any other questions right now, we're actually going to move into closing this session tonight. We are going to just leave some information up so that folks who may be running late and still wanted to join can join future info sessions. And of course, you all who are here are welcome to join future info sessions, and we strongly encourage you to participate in the public hearing next week and provide testimony there. All right, we're going to sign off, but thank you so much, everyone. And again, please, we encourage you to participate in the public hearing or, submit questions through the website or email us at equitabledevelop@planning.nyc.gov. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone.
Bye.